So first, let's look at the food share in the budget around the world. And this comes from data sets that the World Bank collects a data set in many countries called the Living Standard Measurement Surveys. And they very nicely put them on a website. Not all of their surveys, because in some cases they have agreement with governments that doesn't allow them to do that, but a lot of their surveys are on the web. You can actually download them and play with them. You're welcome to do that. And we did that. So we took the overall expenditure to compute people's budget, transfer it into PPP dollars. So this is people who live under $1 a day at purchasing power parity, so in US prices, and look at the share of their budget. So this is what we find for a bunch of people living in rural areas. And this is food, alcohol, tobacco, education, and health. So what are your remarks when you see these numbers? Richard?
I have a question
about
the education percentages. What do those mean is that whether they're paying for tuition or educational supplies?
So this is only education expenditure. So this is tuition if the child is in a private school or if they get extra tuition, which a lot of people in developing countries do. They get like extra help at home. This could be school uniform, school books, boarding school for kids who are in boarding school. Any education-related expenditure would be in there. So then in 2.1, Mexico is spending more on alcohol and tobacco. Mexico, more on alcohol and tobacco than on education. Spends very, very little on health. That doesn't mean people are totally unhealthy, but actually Mexico has an excellent healthcare system, which is basically free for most people. And in all of the countries, the share on alcohol and tobacco tends to be at least comparable to what we see for education and health. Yep.
Why don't the numbers add up to 100%?
Oh, because there are other things you do with your money other than food, alcohol, education, and health. Like going to the movies, putting some clothes on your back, that kind of stuff. Yeah. If it adds up to more than 100, we're in trouble, which is quite possible, but I hope not. I hope not. I don't guarantee it, but I hope that kind of mistakes would not have withstood scrutiny. Yeah, so the question is whether it's high or low. So one thing I should say is that it's kind of variable. You know, it goes from pretty low in India, 56%, to pretty high in Timor, 77%. Remember, this is all people who are equally poor in terms of their ability to consume things because they're all below $1 a day at PPP. And they make very different choices. So they are quite variable. Whether it's high or low, I think it's in the eye of the beholder. On the one hand, it's certainly a high part of the budget compared to what people spend, for example, in the US. On the other hand, if you compare it with, for example, what is spent on tobacco or even on education, given that a lot of these countries have a free education system, the education expenditure they are making are extras. You know, I'm surely valuable extras. But that means that there seems to be actually some wiggle room that you could do something about your food budget and increase it without sacrificing anything else that's vital for the house. When we spend more money on food, it could be on more nutritious food or more calories, or it could be on not so much more nutritious food, it could be on better tasting food. And the short answer is that the two are happening, which is, I don't know whether it's true at the country level. For example, India is a country that spends very little on food and which has probably the worst nutritional status for this group of people than in the world. But at the individual level, we're going to see that very soon. When people increase how much money they spend on food, they both get more food and they get better food, more expensive food for the calories and the nutrition they are getting. So both things happen together. No, this is everyone. As long as this is everyone who lives on less than $1 a day per capita. So if there are 5 of them, it's their entire budget divided by 5. And if no one has any children, then they won't spend anything on education. Yeah. an answer to the unstated question, which is what explains this variation across countries. And a first possible explanation is the relative price of food is different. So food is relatively more so food could be relatively more expensive in Timor-Leste, which is why people are spending more money to get the same thing. What is interesting is that the opposite seems to be true, which is India, because India is a very large economy that is able to produce very many things in India. The relative price of things like toothbrush, even DVDs, cell phones, that kind of things relative to food is lower in India. So one of the reasons why people seem to be spending, one possible reason, I'm not saying this is a theorem, but this is a conjecture, let's say, is one of the reasons why people in India spend much less on food and more on other things compared to people in Papua New Guinea, is that there is nothing to get in Papua New Guinea except food. So if you're poor, like there is like, what can you buy? Well, in India you can buy shampoo of this kind, and everything's produced locally, hence the relative prices are lower. So, so that's a possible explanation for this pattern. So it's the $1 a day standard takes a basket of consumption good. Of course, food is an important part of it, but there is also the other things that people consume. So it takes the $1 a day, takes the basket of goods. In fact, the way it's computed here, it's the 16 rupees a day actually, takes the basket of goods that is consumed by the poor, rather than your basket of goods or my basket of goods, and price it in the different places and adjust with that. So food plays an important part, but other things play as well. And then within the same $1 a day, it could be that, say in India, for example, food is relatively expensive relative to other things, just because the other things are so cheap and available. The point is that we don't really know what's the requirement, what's the calorie requirement for a human being, partly because it depends on the climate and it depends on what you are doing. And it depends on how much calories you're losing to illnesses and other things like that. One piece of evidence that suggests it's not the entire story is that if it were the case, if I looked at the size of the Indian people compared to the size of anyone else, what should I see? Sorry?
Smaller?
Well, in your hypothesis, where the difference is due to the fact that they need less calories because it's warm, if everything was explained here by the fact that Indian people don't need that much calorie compared to, actually all these countries are warm, but compared to South Africa is a bit more temperate. So poor people in South Africa need to eat a lot because it's cold when it's the winter there. Then if all the differences in calorie consumption were to be explained by these needs, we would find people whose nutritional status would be comparable. So their height would be the same and their weight would be the same. And in fact, Indian people are very, very short and they are very, very skinny. Now you might say, yes, but that's genetic, right? It's just like Indian people are short. But that's actually not true, because the children, when Indian migrants come to the US, they start eating US food. Their children are still smaller. But the children of their children, some of you might be that, are exactly as tall as anybody else. So it suggests that the genetic potential of Indian people in terms of height and body size is no different than that of anybody else. But it's the nutrition, it's their nutritional status that is different. And that affects them directly, and that affects their children just because of when you're in utero in someone who doesn't eat enough, you'll also be smaller. For the longest time, people thought Japanese people were short. But it turns out that the height in Japan are converging to the height everybody else in the world. So this is more of a nutrition thing than all this cereal and maize that we're consuming, than a genetic potential problem. So going back to sort of so two punchlines here. One is that this is moving a lot. which suggests that there is some margin of choices, at least in India, for example. Second is we have this alcohol and tobacco that we could, in principle, get rid of, and then all of that would be extra calories. So that suggests that this is high, this is important, but there seems to be some amount of wiggle room to take Ben's word. There is some amount of wiggle room here.